Well, that was unexpected. Back when this series was first announced, I was excited to see something that fully adapted the comics, since the movie, while it was fun in its own right, left out a lot of the stuff that I loved in the comics, including entire characters. Gladly, although in a totally unexpected way, we did get to see more locations and characters from the comics, and the animation was definitely up to the standard with Yuasa Studio, in fact better than a few of its recent productions. Of course, this didn't end up being an adaptation at all, though, but a sequel of the original Scott Pilgrim timeline, at least following from the movie. This has me feeling both ways about that. So let's talk about it. But first, my channel almost got shut down due to copyright strikes recently. Then, in the middle of that, my grandfather passed away, and on the flight, I both lost my wallet and broke my phone. So, things have been awful. Thankfully, this video is sponsored by TEMU. TEMU sent me some goods of my choosing, which will all be linked in the description below, and to my skeptic surprise, they all came out really nicely. Why skeptical? Because things on TEMU are cheap. I got this Hollow Knight plushie, a really good-looking figurine, a Korok plushie, Persona 5 bag, Mousepad, a Genshin plushie for my wonderful girlfriend who I love, and so many more things for just a total of $100. So go to the description, download the TEMU app, and use my code DKG5275, DKG5275, for 50% off. I even got practical stuff like a nice belt, a bunch of socks, since my old ones started to get holes in them. Thanks again, TEMU, for sponsoring, and onto the video. First, some disappointments. For me personally, we didn't get to see Steven Still's boyfriend. Dang it, I want to see that. We also didn't get to see Lisa, which is one of my favorite characters, at all. Which is unfortunate for me personally because I always found her part in the original story really interesting, and she never appeared in the movie. Although, I can't say I'd know exactly where to put her in this version of the story either. I would also say I'm not the craziest fan of the ending, but I don't think I hate it as much as other people do. So past that, let's break down what the Scott Pilgrim anime even is in the first place, before we can talk about it. The original Scott Pilgrim comic has Scott face negative Scott to realize his inner demons, realize he's actually kind of a bad person, and systematically change who he is going forward. He goes and gets coffee with Natalie to apologize, he asks forgiveness from Kem and the others that he's hurt, and gets together with Ramona. This crucial arc for Scott's character is what I think was crucially missed most in the movie, where Scott learns the power of self-respect and apologizes, but fundamentally doesn't prove that he is going to be a better person or do anything really to change things. So, in my mind, this sequel splits off from the movie timeline. A Scott, still not having reconciled with the poor and obsessive way that he treats women, is now given self-confidence and respect, essentially strengthening his bullheadedness, giving him some confidence, but not fixing the core issue. This Scott eventually is separated long-term from Ramona 10 years in the future, and having not reconciled his feelings with Natalie like in the comics, he becomes like he was with her, but towards Ramona, as Old Wallace says, times 10. We don't see much of the Kariyanagi twins in the movie, and I think this sequel relies on that as they are the last one Ramona considers, but also because of the lack of information in the movie, they are able to really easily reinsert comic canon things like Robot 01 without retconning the movie's events. So the twins help Scott go back in time to stop him from ever getting together with Ramona, because in his mind, it ruined his life and only caused hurt, disrupting the movie's timeline before it can get off the ground. Young Scott then meets old Ramona with old Wallace's help and returns to that timeline, before being confronted by an even more bullheaded Scott determined to stop the course of his life from happening how it did. They defeat him, and Scott and Ramona still get together, now in a timeline where he has faced himself and the person that he could become if he continues living how he is and doesn't change for the better. Ramona also learns a lesson about the course of hurt that she causes herself by running from things that make her happy. So they both learn through their older selves the flaws that complicate their relationship in order to hopefully live a true ending that they both want. In the process, though, Ramona is going back through the story and reconciling with all of her exes on her way to find Scott. This is actually a really good angle, in my opinion, to take things for a new story. As in the comics and the movie, one of the only criticisms I've seen people really have that I think's valid is Ramona's a very passive character. She's kind of like a prize to be won more than an actual girl. Her exes are incel-y goofballs who haven't gotten over her. The only thing we're really told, though, is that in all of the cases, she broke their hearts, sometimes out of lack of empathy and sometimes out of malice. but she never confronts her behavior or changes for the better in either of the original timelines, despite obviously working to try and be a better person in the present. This time, instead of a guy fighting through a girl's emotional baggage and history to get with her, it's a girl working through her own baggage in order to mature enough to properly move forward with a new relationship. Thematically, it's a lot less messy and gives Ramona a proper arc where she is an active participant in the story. So, obviously this doesn't replace the original material. It isn't an adaptation at all. It is clearly meant to be most understood with the context of its previous incarnations, and is trying to tie up the loose ends and correct the record in a way that I think finally gives Ramona an arc. Scott's arc, I think, still isn't nearly as good as the negative Scott from the comics, but it's a change that ties in well with movie Scott's flaws and arc. There's another element that I want to talk about, though. Clearly, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, in returning to past timelines, is making some meta-commentary on original artistic decisions, both lighthearted and serious. We see this largely through old Ramona writing the plot of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World as a screenplay that young Neil mistakes for his own and gets turned into a movie. This movie, directed by Edgar Wrong, a joke on the original director Edgar Wright, which fails to take off, makes a lot of subtle jokes about the original movie's production that most people wouldn't recognize. Like Wallace Wells' actor being straight and the real Wallace Wells taking his job from him, when in reality, the actor for the gay icon Wallace Wells, Kieran Culkin, is himself married to a woman and has children. Sort of self-aware, largely inconsequential jabs like this are present throughout the entire story and would only be picked up on by people extremely familiar with all of the aspects of the material at play. Only like hardcore freakish fans. Like me. Notably though, the original Scott Pilgrim's comics' big reveal is the level to which we have been deceived to what kind of person Scott is by his unreliability as a narrator. In his absence, we fully get to explore characters that otherwise poof into coins in other iterations. Here, the characters actually get to split off, grow, and have their own happy endings. Gideon gets into a mutual relationship with Julie, Lucas Lee finds something that he enjoys for the sake of it, and also becomes good, genuine friends with Gideon. We have Todd give up on his vegan powers in order to be himself, although in the epilogue it seems like he's trying to get back on the horse. No longer concerned by a sense of superiority, but just doing what he wants. Wallace, and I was literally dying laughing at this, falls in love with a guy who works at Nintendo. Knives, Kim, and Steven keep the band going while Scott is away and take the band to a whole nother level by the time he gets back, with Scott's absence giving Knives the room to properly find herself instead of becoming consumed by jealousy. And once Scott returns, instead of him trying to rebound with her, the most painful part of the comic, Scott has already learned his lesson and immediately apologizes and takes responsibility. I can understand if people don't like the way that it took things. It's basically the least playing it safe thing that they could have possibly done. But I think it offers something new with the characters, which is something that I really enjoyed. I liked seeing Julie, Lucas, and Gideon getting along and doing casual, just non-important things. I loved everything with Matthew Mattel. Oh my gosh, he was hilarious. I always thought that he was pretty one-note and underbaked, but to great comedic effect, he becomes one of my favorite characters in this adaptation. He's genuinely lovable. It's crazy how one change of events actually sets everyone down a different path of self-discovery that allows them all to learn something and end up happy. And honestly, I'm past scoffing at sincere happy endings. I like seeing the characters I like end up happy. It's nice to see that, at least in one of the timelines. I will say though, I have no idea how a person unfamiliar with the comic or movie would interpret the show. I think it's probably easy enough to follow the plot of, but I feel like so much of my understanding of things and the characterization of everyone is informed by the comic especially, and just, wow, I'm impressed that they did something this ballsy when I feel like it requires so much context to even properly understand. But I know some fans haven't liked the story as well, and there are certainly a number of minor issues that I have with it too, but hey, I like Scott Pilgrim. Doesn't look like that's changed really. A lot of the criticism I've seen for the show seems really exaggerated to a level of parody. Here, for example, not a single aspect of what makes the series unique or special is present. Like, what on earth does this person think makes the series unique that somehow avoids the litany of things that the show still has and understands from its own original material? The coming-of-age / slice-of-life aspect is almost entirely gone. Like, did we watch the same show? Knives and Kim bonding over her learning to love music, Neil's antics on the movie set, and Todd and Wallace's romantic relationship? The Lucas and Gideon stuff? Like, this has, for its length, the same amount of slice of life stuff as the comic, and far more than the movie. I really don't understand how any remotely sane person could make such a claim. But if you don't feel represented by these specific criticisms, these are just ones that I engaged with on Twitter, feel free to tell me your thoughts below, because I know my housemate who I watched with it felt more iffy about it than I did and hasn't read the comic. Also, check out my super long episode for episode Steven Universe analysis that I just dropped on my other channel. It's like literally almost 3 hours long. It's like 2 hours and 40 minutes. And it's fire, by the way. It's amazing. Anyways, one of the channel's copyright strikes are finally gone, so a big thank you to my patrons and TEMU once again. Daniel Frowsing, Zioma, Benny, MJ, and all of my other supporters who make this possible. If Patreon doesn't work for you, consider supporting me on Ko-fi. Thanks again, and good night.